I have a rowdy bunch with me today. And Prof. Ross, as usual, is the center of attention. So for those in South Africa, everyone knows Prof. Ross. He is a beloved homeopath and leader in homeopathy in South Africa. I'm saying that to everyone in Colombia. But today, I'm interviewing him for a very different reason. And that is because Prof. Ross has many, many hats that my battery on my phone cannot last long enough for us to actually go through all the things that Prof. Ross is working on. So today I wanted to focus on his very important role as chairperson or the secretary of the research portfolio within LMHI, which is really important, especially in this day and age with the amounts of attacks that we have in homeopathy or at homeopathy, to be able to come out with really good, strong research. So, Prof. Ross, tell me about your portfolio. What does it entail?
Okay, so the research portfolio of the LMHI is really focused about developing and profiling the research reputation of the institution. And I came into it tangentially. My research focus personally is on proving. So initially in the LMHI, there was a secretary for research, and then they created a sort of sub committee, if you like, around provings. And then subsequently, that has been really since about 2017. And then I became the secretary for provings, secretary for research a little bit later. And at that point, my focus was on really trying to define and develop the research literacy and capacity within the institution, within the organization. In that, we have always had research presentation within conferences, but the focus of the LMHI Congress, as you well know, is about the collegiality, about people coming together, but unintended consequence, I think, of that is that research has been used as a way to bring people to the conference, as a way of having a conference in some ways. But the quality of research has sometimes been less than optimal. And so in the portfolio, as I'm in it now, my focus is on raising research literacy amongst homeopaths who are fundamentally clinicians. So although we have some interest in research, many homeopaths don't actually have the signposts to be able to make sense of research as it comes to them. And particularly now where we are under attack in various ways, in almost the strongest argument we're going to have for the existence and the efficacy of homeopathy is going to come through various forms of homeopathic research. And so we need homeopaths as a community to have a level of research literacy. They need to know the state of play. So we can't be talking about a research position that might have been 20 years ago. We can't be expounding theories that essentially have been abandoned or debunked, so to speak. So we have to know the state of the game. And I'm hoping that by raising some of this understanding of shifting the thinking, which is very strongly clinical for homeopaths, you talk about things they want to say, how does this relate to me and my patient? To getting some sort of sense of, okay, so I might be a clinician, but when I want to report a case, whether it be in a journal or whether it be at a conference on a stage, what are the things I really need to be considering? So, for instance, historically in homeopathy, we have people who present cases at a conference, and they give all sort of beautiful, we love stories, so beautiful stories of a patient, and it's sort of quite nebulous, and then we identify usually a rare remedy. So we have this case, we gave this remedy, it was horse milk, lacoquinum. We gave lacoquinum, 1 dose of an
Something that most people don't know about.
and the patient was much better. And we construct a whole argument for how this fits.
Sure.
And there's almost within homeopathic personality a desire to see the miraculous in homeopathy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that sort of case holds very little water. So what do we want to know? We want the case to be well described. We want some objective measures. We want really clear and concrete diagnostic criteria. We want clear and concrete identification of a remedy
It has to be
corresponding
rock
to
solid.
materia medica. When the follow-up comes, we want objectively assessed outcomes. We want the patient's assessment of what has happened. We want a decent period of follow-up. We want to be able to compare this to measures that might be applied in the orthodox clinical context, so that we can say, yes, there is an effect, and it was the remedy. So then if we can raise that, in recent webinars that we did, looking at causality attribution and case reporting, how do we know that what happened was not just the passage of time? So when someone then presents a case as an abstract for a conference in the future, you can look at this abstract and say, okay, where are the objective measures? How did they determine an effect? How did they frame that causality assessment? Did they use monarch criteria, etc.? And if it's not done in that sort of way, it shouldn't be on the podium.
Sure, absolutely.
If someone wants to talk about approving, what methodology did they use in this proving? How did they analyze the data? How do they know that this is a clear effect of the substance on a healthy human being? If they can do that, if they can say, we applied this particular guideline, this is how we separated the data, etc., sure, let that proving be presented. But don't have someone come onto the stage and they say, well, we did it like this and everything.
Sort of wishy-washy kind of.
We can't afford that anymore.
No,
so this is...
It does us more harm.
It really does us more harm. And it's a lovely opportunity for the person who's doing it, but really we can't afford to do that. So there's that aspect, the actual work that needs to be done with LMHI members and the homeopathic community at large. The other important factor in the current research portfolio is making connections, because the LMHI historically has not enjoyed, as I've said, a particularly esteemed research reputation. But there are other organizations that have very, very robust and strong research reputations. So there now has to be communication, there has to be infusion, there has to be a collective upping of the game. ECH as an organization arose from the LMHI. I don't know if you know the history of where ECH came from. We need to work with ECH because we are at least siblings. We are pursuing the same agenda. And so when it comes to the research or the challenges facing homeopathy and where research comes into it, we have to be on the same page. So for instance, I said I came in on as some sort of proving expert initially. The original collaboration and the only really robust with an output collaboration between ECH and LMHI was on provings. In 2013, Jean-Pierre Janssen, who was not the president of ECH at the time, he was chairperson of the subcommittee for provings, he and I got together to convene some sort of best practice think tank around provings. And in 2014, we produced the harmonized guidelines for provings. And I've actually sat on that subcommittee on the ECH ever since. So we've worked together around the issue of provings, and we've had input from people like Todd Hoover from the HPUS, to align our sort of collective sense of how a proving should happen with what is required by the Americans. The other group is the Indians. So there are three real proving guidelines, if you like, globally, and we're trying to get them to all talk to each other. So I've had that connection with the ECH. We're currently reviewing those guidelines. It's nearly 10 years since we developed the first set. So
has a lot changed in those 10 years?
In terms of, not so much has changed. The issues that come out of the LMHI ECH guidelines is everyone using them? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily. Okay. And that's as I spoke about earlier about looking at people presenting abstracts. My view is that if someone wants to present a proving going forward, they need to articulate which set of guidelines was used to frame their methodology. And Absolutely. If they don't have an accepted guideline, the Indian, the HPUS, or the LMHI ECH guideline, then it's not a proving that should be on a platform. Yeah. So not so much has changed, and the guidelines were not designed to prescribe. So in fact, the way the guidelines are set up is that there are some things that are really required, and then there are many things that are recommended. So for instance, 10 years ago, one of the things that was a recommendation was that a proving should go through an ethics committee. And we put it as a recommendation, not a requirement, because of a particular context at that time. My own view is that we've now moved on 10 years, and I think we should seriously consider whether that should be a requirement rather than a recommendation. So we're in a different time. We have different pressures. There are some things that need to be tweaked. One of the other things that we've recognized within the guideline that we perhaps missed was the guideline that we developed in 2014 was built around the experiment itself. Mm-hmm. So how do we design the experiment? How do we define the source substance? What potencies are we going to use? What sort of dosage? Is there a placebo group? How long is the run-in? Those sorts of things, the experiment. Mm-hmm. Where we recognize that there is tremendous variability and perhaps the need for an extension of the guidelines is, what do we do with the data? How do we capture the data? How do we process placebo and verum data? How do we turn the data into rubrics? How do we compile materia medica? Those aspects, the post-experiment aspects of approving the honor guidelines. And one of the events, if you like, that drew this into particularly sharp focus was that having developed the guideline in 2014, Renzo Galassi, past president of the LMHI, decided we would do a multi-center proving of a single substance which he would identify. He would get a single manufacturer to make it up. I would develop a single protocol that we would all use. The substance would be sent from the single source to all 5 countries. We would do the proving and we would compile the data. When it came, it was a agreed protocol. When it came to the data, we actually ended up with 5 quite different sets of data. Oh. And to try to pull these together to something that it was really difficult. And some of it related to translation because we had the proving conducted amongst populations that spoke Spanish, Italian, and English. And so, for instance, the Italians didn't provide complete journals in Italian. Because that was a lot of translation. So they extracted what they thought were valid symptoms. In the Spanish-speaking countries, Argentina and Mexico, we got journals in English and Spanish from Argentina. But in Mexico, we didn't get the journals, we got rubrics. So
all different.
That was like a big red light of, we have a protocol that actually says this is how it should happen, but it didn't. Yeah. And so the guideline actually needs to start bringing that process into some sort of narrowing. I mean, the reason we developed the guideline back in 2013, 2014 was because there was a diversity of proving methodologies being employed, and we wanted to bring the guideline so that you narrow the field a little bit, because then it becomes easier, A, for us to understand the experiment.
And more reliable.
And it also allows us potentially to pool data. So a proving of calendula done here on 8 people and a proving of calendula done on someone, another 12 people somewhere else. If we're using vastly different methodologies, we can't pull the data. So the point is that we now need to embed the LMHI with other research efforts, collective research efforts. And I think we've done a fairly good job so far of getting a lot more communication between LMHI, ECH, HRI around a shared research agenda, around trying to get more unified messaging about some of homeopathy is about changing a narrative. Homeopathy uses old language, a language that is not seen as particularly scientific. Fundamental concept, for instance, life force.
Sure.
Or vital force. What is that?
Yeah,
so we have to think about how do we explore other paradigms of understanding life processes? What is the language within those modern, to some extent verified paradigms? And how does, because homeopathy does speak to those paradigms, more systemic paradigms, how do we explain vital force within that paradigm? So maybe we need to change the words. Miasm, an alienating word. What are we going to use instead of miasms? Because there's something that we're describing, but the word is wrong, and the word is alienating, and the word immediately sets us out as being stuck in 200 years ago. We use an antiquated language, our concepts are debunked, etc. If we can frame what we know to be true and real in a modern language that has its own validity, then suddenly we start making sense within a particular context. And that is also within the sort of research pursuit. Because research is not just basic clinical proving type research, but also of trying to understand how we position homeopathy in terms of what is known.
I think it's such an important facet of what we need to do, because that is not my strength, for example. And I would need people like you to be able to do that, so I can then communicate that. So it's such a vital part of the wheel, and I don't think we could have a better person doing it. I hope that the term is not only 3 years.
It is. It's actually 3 years twice, but I'm in the second one now, since Istanbul was the second one.
We'll be doing some motivating.
So in 2 years' time, I'm no longer the research secretary. But
we've got lots of stuff to do. So with that, Prof. Ross, thank you so much for your time. It was really lovely. Don't stop doing the amazing work that you are doing. And I think it's very clear for the audience to see that this is not just stuff that happens once a year. This is a every single day task, and we're very grateful that you're doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.